Good morning. Turn down the air in this thing. I want to read today from Phantastes by MacDonald again. And there's this part in here. So this Anados is on this journey through fairyland, and he somehow picks up his shadow, or as it says in the book, his shadow finds him. And I think the shadow, it could be a representation for many things, but I see it kind of as a representation for depression. At least that's how it echoes with my own experience. But he talks about how the shadow it'll follow him, and it's alive sort of on its own. He calls it his demon, my evil demon. And he'll see wonderful things in fairyland. Like he sees a lovely fairy child with two magical toys, and then the shadow moves out from behind him where it was resting, and it moves out in front of him and casts itself over the child. And then it's no longer a fairy child. It just looks like a plain, ordinary child with two plain, ordinary, everyday toys. And he says in this book that he comes to rely on his shadow rather than to abhor it, as he should, because he begins to believe that it shows him how things really are. And he says, therefore I can't be taken in by these magical charms of fairyland. But there was nothing to take in. He's being taken in by the false what's the right word? Honesty, I guess, of this shadow. But I'll read a little bit here, and then I'll continue on this. So you got to be familiar with the book. There's a lot here so anyway, he meets previously in the story. He meets a knight. They both are seduced by the spirit of the elder tree. The knight is wearing rusty armor, and he says, "I'll never polish my armor. It'll be polished by the blows of worthy combat. I'm going to go wash away my stains with works," which there's a really great deep profundity to that, and also problematic salvifically, but I don't think that's what MacDonald was trying to say. So anyway, then they meet again later on in the story, and this is that meeting. One evening, as a great silent flood of western gold flowed through an avenue in the woods down the stream, just when I first saw him, came the sad knight, riding on his chestnut steed. But his armor did not shine half so red as when I saw him first. Many a blow of mighty sword and axe, turned aside by the strength of his mail, and glancing adown the surface, had swept from its path the fretted rust, and the glorious steel had answered the kindly blow with the thanks of returning light. And it's very interesting, the kindly blow, that these blows of combat, they can polish you and shine you up, and they're good for you, and they make you better. I love that, the kindly blow. That he's been in combat, most likely mortal combat, and MacDonald says that combat was kindly. I like that. These streaks and spots made his armor look like the floor of a forest in the sunlight. His forehead was higher than before, for the contracting wrinkles were nearly gone, and the sadness that remained on his face was a sadness of a dewy summer twilight, not that of a frosty autumn morn. He, too, had met the elder maid in his eye, but he had plunged into the torrent of mighty deeds, and the stain was nearly washed away. No shadow followed him. He had not entered the dark house. He had not had time to open the closet door. That's where he picked up his shadow, was this dark house and this closet door that he was told not to open. But will he ever look in? I said to myself. Must his shadow find him someday? But I could not answer my own questions. We traveled together for 2 days, and I began to love him. Pardon me. It was plain that he suspected my story in some degree, and I saw him once or twice looking curiously and anxiously at my attendant gloom, which all this time had remained very obsequiously behind me. But I offered no explanation, and he asked none. Shame at my neglect of his warning, and a horror which shrunk from even alluding to its cause, kept me silent. Still, in the evening of the second day, some noble words from my companion roused all my heart, and I was at the point of falling on his neck and telling him the whole story, seeking, if not for helpful advice, for of that I was hopeless, yet for the comfort of sympathy, when round slid the shadow, and enwrapped my friend, and I could not trust him. The glory of his brow vanished, the light of his eye grew cold, and I held my peace. The next morning we parted. But the most dreadful thing of all was that I now began to feel something like satisfaction in the presence of the shadow. I began to be rather vain of my attendant, saying to myself, in a land like this, with so many illusions everywhere, I need his aid to disenchant the things around me. He does away with all appearances and shows me things in their true color and form. And I am not one to be fooled with the vanities of the common crowd. I will not see beauty where there is none. I will dare to behold things as they are, and if I live in a waste instead of a paradise, at least I will live knowing where I live. But of this, a certain exercise of his power which soon followed quite cured me, turning my feeling towards him once more into loathing and distrust. And that's so profound, and that's exactly what my depression did for me. It really was like a demonic shadow that followed me around. It wasn't, I don't want to speak for everyone, but it wasn't just a chemical imbalance in the brain. It was something that had a life of its own, that was vile and powerful. And it made it so I couldn't trust my friends. The people who most loved me and most cared for me and who could most help me, I couldn't trust them. And fortunately, I'm the kind of guy that wears my heart on my sleeve. I don't think I'd be doing this YouTube channel otherwise, but so I was less reticent to hold things down, and I had a blog where I just shared with the world when I got fed up enough with how I perceived things. But it really does enwrap those people around you that most care for you and lead you to distrust them. And then also it really tricks you into thinking that you're seeing things the right way. And, if life is miserable, at least you know you're wise. And, there's this book by Lacey Sturm. She's got several, but this one's called The Mystery. And she's talking about, she struggled with depression for a long time, and she was starting to come out of it, starting to find hope and life again. And she was relating this to a friend. And the friend said, "Oh, well, you sound like you're beginning to get well." And something in her revolted against that. Like, no, I'm not. She thought. She talks about how she thought that the cynical way that she perceived life as a result of this depression and this fixation on death and despair. She thought that was the right way to look at it. And people who were happy, people who could rejoice and live life with joy and life, and that they were mistaken and naive and foolish. She looked down on them, and that was my experience when I was depressed at the time when I was reading this for the first time. And when I read that passage, I thought, like something in me recoiled against that. Oh, you're beginning to get healthy again. I was like, no, I'm seeing things clearly. You're the one that's messed up. But it's the exact opposite. That depression takes the true forms, the true beauty and goodness of life, and it twists it and masks it and destroys it. And God eventually delivered me from that. I had a night. I've written about this on a blog I had, that blog I mentioned earlier. I had a night where God just confronted me with that exact passage from Lacey Sturm. And I wrestled all night. I was up probably till 2 a.m. just fighting with God. And finally I let it go. And I let him have control. And my depression didn't go away right away. It was several years. In fact, I look back on my writing from the years after that event, and I'm like, man, I was still pretty messed up. But it didn't have control like it did. It was never going to threaten to take my life again. But I just find that example from MacDonald so profound and so accurate, that this depression, it follows you. It's a demon that runs its own way. You don't control it. It controls you, and it changes how you see the world, and it spoils the world in front of you and demystifies it. But he says it disenchants, but you don't want to you want the Spirit of God to enchant the world, because it is an enchanting world. It's so full of mystery and joy and life, and the life screams out to you, saying, live, and that depression mutes that and changes it and buries it down. And so I would just, if you're struggling with something like that, I would just encourage you, don't trust the shadow that follows you around. Learn to abhor it, and one day you will be free.